The stocky man smirked and let out a short heh, as if mocking his interlocutor. The guy with disheveled hair lowered his head and asked in a shaky voice for a delay in payment. In a richly decorated room, 3 men sat silent, as if the air had thickened with tension. In a dry voice, one of them informed them that since Count Korin's death, confidence in their land had plummeted. He added irritably that they had been waiting for a year, but now the goodwill had run out. The interlocutor stated that now Prince Calyx, as the future Earl, must return the favor. Calyx cringed inwardly, realizing that he was being denied a reprieve just 2 weeks before the deadline. He wanted to say something, but the other man interrupted, beginning to explain the current financials of the territory. The one coldly noted that the annual income of the Count's lands exceeded 60,000 gold. Calyx, trying to remain calm, said that finding a lender for that amount was not a problem. Hearing about the 60,000 gold, the boy asked in a panic if it was even possible. The man with a strained smile pretended to be pleased, but in his thoughts he laughed at Calyx's naivety. He thought ominously that such a sum could not be obtained without connections and there was nothing to count on. Calyx, standing in silence, felt the tension in his throat. The situation seemed hopeless. Meanwhile, the man was mentally triumphant, having decided that the Earl's land was already his. The man bowed ceremoniously and said his goodbyes, leaving Calyx in silence. He contemplated with disdain how the noble son would soon be humiliatingly begging him for mercy. A wicked thought flashed through his mind: sell Calyx at the slave market, but play first. With a smile of feigned politeness, he thanked Calyx for his hospitality as if it was sincere. As he left, he threw in a mocking wish for good luck, a nasty sneer in his voice. Calyx stood silent, immersed in his thoughts, as if he already knew what to do next. The boy was lost in his calculations, trying to figure out how many years he would have to save up for 60,000 gold. Calyx sighed tiredly and told him to sit down so he wouldn't interfere with his concentration. In desperation, the man shouted, how could the prince stay so calm when everything was on the verge of collapse? Calyx, studying the map, hypothesized that the ruins in the highlands hid the right vault. Calyx speculated that the ruins might indeed be the key, and decided to explore deeper. He remembered that outside of the castles on Ellen's continent, it was best not to walk around without a reason. The mountain uplands region was considered particularly dangerous and was home to wild creatures. Among them, there were cruel monsters like the Risarki that were best avoided. One of them was already warily lurking in the shadows, clearly smelling the approach of someone foreign. The castle was drowned in silence at night as shadows slid across the paved courtyard. Calyx stepped forward confidently, and the boy behind him asked anxiously where he was going. The prince figured he needed someone who knew the highlands well. He decided that an assassin who valued his life might be suitable for this mission. As they approached the right place, one of the men turned around and muttered in surprise. The stranger looked at Calyx, horrified, and suddenly realized who stood before him. He said a respectful hello, and the boy, remaining with the prince, said he would not interfere. Before entering, he explained that this was Hydra's former room, then disappeared around the corner. Calyx looked around the room and noted that it appeared surprisingly cozy and neat. The humble voice of the room's owner explained that he had just cleaned up a bit. The woman entered with a sneer, stating that the previous owner had only collected expensive, tasteless junk. Calyx replied with a slight smile that she looked quite well. The woman carelessly tossed back that she was doing fine, as could be easily seen. The guy flared up and yelled at her to watch her language, calling her insolent. Both the woman and Calyx froze in tense silence, exchanging barbed glances. The woman accused Calyx of deception with a cold expression, looking at him sneeringly. Calyx calmly admitted that he had simply poisoned her back, no unnecessary drama. Her face contorted with shock, and she asked back in a broken voice, poison? The ominous silhouette in the background mentioned the GD doll, the infamous poisoned weapon. The woman screamed, not believing that Calyx could get his hands on such poison, and called him a whore of nobility. Calyx said with icy calmness that anything could be obtained for gold, including rare poisons. He specified that GD's poison had over 3,000 possible antidotes, it all depended on the formula. With a cryptic grin, he promised to suggest an antidote that would suit her, and pointed to himself. Calyx noted that she got the point more quickly than he'd expected, and tilted his head slightly. The woman squirmed and asked if he had come all this way because he needed her. Calyx stared thoughtfully in front of him, unsure of what to do in this situation. The woman declared with a lazy smile that she wasn't going to take orders from him anymore. Licking her lips seductively, she added that she might change her mind if she had a special moment with him. She settled back and hummed that it would have to be executed very, very well. The boy snatched the knife with rage, shouting an insult, but Calyx stopped him abruptly with a shout. Calyx coldly spoke Leela's name and stated that he had come to give her a chance at survival. She asked incredulously what he even meant by such an offer. Calyx explained that even if he let her go, she would still die just outside the door. He exhaled slowly, as if holding back irritation, and continued without emotion. Guy reminded her that the Shikin family was now feuding with Viscount Kosheran's house. Leela recalled how the Kosheran family had turned the head's daughter into a villainess and sealed the child's magic. Calyx stiffly reminded her that she was the key witness that made it possible. She gasped in panic as she realized how deeply involved she was. Leela asked desperately why she wasn't being rescued, since she was the only one who could clear Calyx's name. She tried to object, but Calyx pointed out, the Kosheran's plan to take over the Shekina lands had already been ruined. Calyx calmly said that nobles do not forgive those who thwart their plans, especially commoners. Leela admitted in despair that she had seen many die serving the nobles like dogs. Tears and anger mingled in her cry, why did this happen to her? Blinded by emotion, she abruptly grabbed the jug, preparing for something desperate. Calyx and the boy immediately tensed up, wary of her every move. Leela lunged at Calyx with a cry of die, swinging the jug like a weapon. Calyx remained unfazed, his gaze remaining cold despite the death threat. In the next second, she was thrown back by the blow and collapsed to the floor with a muffled groan. The boy screamed, calling her a despicable murderer and adding that she dared to rebel against the Lord. Leela shrank back in pain with a barely audible moan, pressing her cheek against the cold stone. Calyx thanked him for his protection, but asked him not to humiliate Leela, she deserved better. He reminded her that she was the reason he was the next lord. Looking down at her, Calyx noted that people hate someone who opens their eyes to the truth. He questioned why that was the case, glancing at Leela lying on the floor. The guy in the corner answered simply, it's easier that way, not to think, but to blame whoever is around. Calyx pronounced that venting emotions, no matter who the other person was, gave relief, but not for long. He grinned, adding that he could tell by her determination that she wasn't going to die. Gritting her teeth, Leela struggled to her knees and answered confidently, of course not. Screaming at the top of her voice, she declared that there was no way she was going to die, she was going to survive. Calyx, with a thin smile, quietly echoed her words, she could not afford to die. Calyx stood up abruptly and declared that she would be of some use now. He promised protection from his pursuers if Leela would help him in his cause. She screamed indignantly, thinking he was going to threaten her through her family. Calyx laughed, completely unimpressed by her hysteria and suspicion. He calmly clarified that he wouldn't even care if she died right now. Leela grimly recognized that to nobles like the Count, she was merely expendable. She challengingly asked why, if there were many like her, Calyx had chosen her. The guy replied that firstly, it saves time, and secondly, the reason lay deeper. Leela tensed as Calyx reminded her of her own words spoken earlier. He stepped closer, his footsteps echoing muffledly across the floor, creating a sense of tense pause. In the past frame, the heroine had recognized that she had no choice, even if it seemed selfish. Fingers flicked into the air, he abruptly cut off any attempts at doubt for her, giving her only 1 minute. He promised coldly, if she agreed in that time, he would give her her long-awaited freedom. Her body trembles, her fists clench. She realizes there's no way out, it's too fast and too hard. Her thoughts are overwhelming, she has been thrown into the meat grinder again, and even if there is an ugly man with a handsome face around, she is forced to accept the rules. In the last moment, the heroine recognized that she has to act, even if someone she despises is around. She clenches her teeth and thinks furiously that she has an obligation to survive at all costs, no matter what. He says calmly that the Shokin and Kosheran families have already crossed the line, and there's no turning back. He chuckles, an alliance with the Kosherans is to his advantage if they do as he says. She coldly replies that she agrees, but only as a mercenary, not a subordinate, and he sighs heavily. He sighed tiredly earlier, agreeing to the heroine's terms, and now everything suddenly explodes. The guy breaks down into a scream, accusing the heroine of insolence and demanding that she watch her tongue. She calmly raises her palm and says that she is merely being polite to her employer. With a sly half-smile, she adds that she's not going to sacrifice herself for some new ally. He gets even angrier, shouting that there is no ally, his face contorted with angry incomprehension. An argument had erupted before, but now the conversation abruptly changes to serious information. The guy bewilderedly remembers that the heroine mentioned something important the other day. She calmly clarifies, it was about the training camp of the shadow troops of the Kosheran family. A grim image pops into his mind, it's where they train the children of war, known as Golda's Special Squad. He jumps up and yells that he wants a map, with details of the Kosheran kingdom and territory. After his abrupt demand for a map, it's clear, the plan is urgent, and there's no time to sway. The boy excitedly remembers that there is a huge map hanging in the war council chamber, and perks up. He cheerfully offers to move, loudly shouting, "Behind you, my lord," with theatrical politeness. The heroine looks at him in surprise and asks why he isn't going first, to which he mumbles a refusal. The other guy frowns and clarifies if he even knows the way, and he awkwardly excuses himself and asks to go first. The previous moment, he had hesitantly asked to go forward, but didn't really know the way himself. The heroine irritably reminds him that knights must follow their master, and kicks him forward. The path leads them to a grand building. It is the war council chamber. He steps inside in awe and freezes, looking at a room full of strategic materials. She calmly explains that this is where the most classified military information of the entire continent of Ellen is kept. Earlier, they entered the room with military secrets, and now the hero's eyes are fixed on the map. He repeats the name Golda Highlands, finds the place on the map and clarifies what he knows about it. It is explained to him, it is a disputed territory where the interests of two noble houses clash. The hero's gaze becomes sharp. He hears that copper mining in the mines has been suspended because of the conflict. He asks if Baron Erebon is on their side, and receives a confident confirmation. He clarified in the previous moment that Baron Erebon is on their side, and now the discussion turns to details. He asks about the map's accuracy and the timing of the last update, but gets only an uncertain answer. The heroine says that the map is a bit out of date, but there should be no problem with adjustments. He confidently states that he navigates the map without difficulty, as he has been running around these places since childhood. He then informs her that there are ancient ruins in Golda and is going to explore them, but she is confused. Such ruins should not be there. In the previous moment, the hero stated that there are ancient ruins in Golda, and the heroine clearly doubts this. He recalls his childhood and says that he heard from a very young age, it was forbidden to go there. The heroine looks up sharply. She too remembers how adults strictly forbade approaching the place. Suddenly she realizes that these stories were true, and anxiously utters, "It exists." The hero, standing in front of the map, asks a question about the time when the Kosherin family started training secret units. In the previous moment, he asked the question about the beginning of training secret squads, and she hesitates. She replies that she doesn't fully understand the meaning of the question, but in her experience it was about 15 years. Guy clarifies that this is when the territorial conflict between the two families began. He hopes that the heroine has already understood something, but receives only an inarticulate "not really" in response. The heroine nods discreetly, as if putting a puzzle together in her mind, and says, "I see." In the previous moment, she coldly confirmed that she got the gist of it, and it clearly hurt him. The guy boils over, yelling that her tone is insulting, and she responds by sharply parrying who he is in general. She explains, "You can't build an army from scratch without a good reason and huge funds." He gets even angrier, but she throws the obvious in his face. "The money came from somewhere, you fool." The hero calmly completes the chain. As Croto said, the Kosherin family has clearly found a new source of income. Earlier, he concluded that the Kosherin family had found a source of money, and now reveals how they used it. He explains, the funds most likely went to secretly train soldiers and covert operations, as in Leila's case. Leela is surprised and demands to know what the source of the money is and how it's connected to the ruins. The hero says that silver veins are often found next to copper veins, and there is an impurity of silver in the ore. Croto interjects in shock, asking if they're claiming that the Kosherin family is secretly mining silver, to which the hero calmly replies, that would be a serious crime. He explained in the previous moment that illegal silver mining is a serious crime, and continues to ponder. He suggests imagining what it would be like to find a silver mine on one's land, but have no rights to it. He adds that any deposits of gold and silver belong to the crown, regardless of location. When asked about the ruins, he smiles and says it's the perfect place to hide something. The heroine frowns and clarifies what all this has to do with them. Is he really going to start a war for funding? The heroine suspected in the previous moment that he might start a war for money, and now the doubts are growing. Croto grimly agrees. Yes, it's annoying, but everything said is true. He adds that illegal silver mining is a crime, and even winning the war will do nothing if everything is revealed to the royal family. The hero points out that all the accumulated profits are probably still stored in that place. He chuckles and says, the money was stolen illegally, so even if it's taken away, no one can sue. In a past moment, the character explained that illegally obtained money can't be defended in court, and this stunned the others. Croto and Leela finally realize the nature of the plan and almost simultaneously exclaim, I see. Later that night, the silence of the castle is broken by movement as they head off to the next stage of action. The hero encounters an older man, and Kroto whispers anxiously that it is his master. The older man looks sternly and warns, haste and arrogance can lead to trouble. In a past moment, the older man doubted the young hero's decision, but now he hears the answer. The hero parries with a smile that he sounds like a grandfather worried about his grandson and asks to stay. He says that it's important that the likes of Kroto grow up faster to achieve common goals. He adds that it's dangerous to leave the area now, and the risk to both of them is too great. The man freezes, then admits his mistake and respectfully asks the hero to be careful. In the previous moment, the older man wished the hero to be careful, but immediately changes his tone dramatically. He orders Kroto to serve the young master with full dedication with intimidating fury. Kroto responds cheerfully with a raised thumb, but immediately gets yelled at for not being serious and apologizes. The older man walks past without dropping a step, and Kroto bows to him in embarrassment. He then turns to the others and calls loudly to everyone, drawing attention to what is about to happen. After the older man's loud order, everyone gathers. The young warriors listen and watch with tension. One of them notices that the young lord's wounds are not yet healed, but he still acts for the land. The older man gives the order to follow him with the utmost loyalty, and everyone in formation shouts yes. One of the soldiers cynically remarks that no one will follow a suicidal weakling. Meanwhile, cloaked Leela watches silently from the shadows, pondering how to strengthen their loyalty. After gathering the squads and briefing them, they begin to move, and the scene shifts to the ominous depths. A deep well opens a path downward, where faint glimmers flicker in the darkness. Kroto walks ahead with a lantern in his hand, turns around and warns with a smile to be careful. The hero descends heavily, muttering unhappily, while Kroto watches him carefully from below. He explains that ahead is an underground water passage leading far beyond the castle. In the last shot, Kroto has reported that the tunnel leads beyond the castle, and now begins to move inland. Through the mist and stone walls stretches a dark passageway, illuminated only by the soft light of a lantern. Kroto raises his hand with the lantern, confidently says forward, and the hero silently agrees. Behind them come other participants. With torches in their hands, they step by step advance through the narrow tunnel. Among them, wrapped in a cloak, walks Leela, quietly observing what is happening and remaining silent. Calyx Shiken emerges from the semi-darkness with a tense face and exhales excitedly, "This is it." Calyx's companion, alert and collected, announces that they have finally reached the right place. He grabs the heavy handle, tries to turn it, but struggles to turn the locked door. Clenching his fists and furrowing his brow, he yells that he heard a click and that he almost wasted the moment. Calyx thrusts his hand forward sharply and imperiously demands, "Let the damn man grab it." Calyx Shiken grips the edge of the hatch with force, pushing himself outward with a jerk. He raises his head sharply, exhaling in utter surprise and exclaims, disbelieving, "Is this really here?" The companion calmly opens the gate and says it's an old abandoned mill, it's a century old. Calyx freezes, looking around with wide-open eyes, and whispers quietly, "Wow." The view from above, carts, horses, tents, everything is thorough. Calyx is amazed at the preparations. After marveling at the preparations, Calyx Shiken hears himself being asked to get on a horse, and smiles. He irritably cuts his companion off, telling him not to call him my lord in such places anymore. Calyx insists that he be addressed only as young master from now on. He watches the others change clothes, and mentally notes that it all looks too fake. Calyx calls out to Kroto, who confusedly confuses his address, immediately correcting himself to the correct one. Calyx Shiken sternly demands confirmation that everything he asked for has indeed been prepared. Kroto picks up the rags in disgust and asks if he really has to wear such a smelly thing. Calyx offers with an evil smirk to change into a porter's costume or play the newlyweds, if anything. Kroto panics and refuses, stammering that he can't sit next to a woman as dangerous as Leela. Meanwhile, the background glimpses busy people, the wagons, the preparations, the bustle before departure. Calyx Shiken, seething with anger, is furious at the thought that Kroto has once again given away too much in front of everyone. Kroto, scratching the back of his head, walks away, and Calyx glares at him angrily with clenched fists. He frowns, but inwardly justifies himself, saying that he didn't really say anything wrong. Reaching his hand forward, Kroto tentatively suggests that Leela go together and calls her sweetest. In response, Leela stares at him in silence while those around her can barely contain their laughter at the awkward scene. Leela coldly blows Kroto away, telling him to just step aside and stay out of the way. Calyx Shiken, watching this, whistles quietly, barely containing a gloating smirk. Kroto freezes in place, stunned by such a friendly interaction between his comrades. He frowns irritably, remembering that only with a normal relationship can there be any synergy. But Leela turns away, stone-faced, and completes the thought: if not, there will only be a breakdown. Calyx Shiken imagines how things could end in discord and even deaths within the team. He ponders that perhaps Hero's destiny isn't just a program, but something more. He thinks the ideal would be for Leela to gain the trust of the other women on her own. As he ponders, Calyx hesitates. Should he intervene secretly to help her and not upset the balance? But then Crowto reports that everything is ready, and Calyx decides to move. They need to get farther away before dawn. Crowto raises his lantern, signaling, and the whole group begins to busily pack for the journey. The caravan of wagons moves slowly along the winding road, getting lost among the night forest. The travelers make short stops, rest by the fire, and again continue their journey without further ado. Scenes of passing villages are visible, fleeting glances, brief encounters, and traces of their movement. Calyx Shiken, huddled by the fire, notices that the last village they passed was the farthest. Calyx Shiken gives a clear order: everyone take off their masks and prepare for real combat starting tomorrow. The cooled cauldron by the fire reminds him that the time for a rest has passed, a whole other phase is beginning. He declares with fury in his voice that this is when the real work begins, unadorned. Gathering his team, Calyx throws the command to move, and the whole group resolutely takes off. The caravan is moving down the road again, but now inside everyone is ready for the real battle. Crowto is alarmed when he notices something in the distance and silently wonders what it could be. He shouts for the scouts to return, and Calyx Shiken breaks from his seat, rushing towards them. One of the scouts reports out of breath: a group of forest sasquolves has been spotted ahead. Crowto is amazed. He asks again, clarifying the size of the nest, and gets the answer: there are 5 of them. One of the fighters in black abruptly grabs his head, growling sharply in internal pain. Calyx Shiken orders Crowto to take him up into the trees. He wants to see for himself. Crowto readily agrees, blurring into a confident smile, and immediately springs into action. He grabs Calyx firmly and makes a powerful upward thrust, tossing him into the air. Calyx loses his balance, exhaling in surprise as Crowto struggles to hold him up. The view from above opens up dramatically, showing the forest, valley, and distant snow-capped mountains through the foliage. Calyx Shiken and Crowto gaze intently into the distance while the wind flutters their cloaks. Calyx raises his hand sharply to his eyes and points. There, right in front of them, is a target. A massive Sasquatch moves slowly among the trees, blinking as if catching their gaze. One of the monsters turns around sharply, and it becomes clear: they are not as simple as they appear. Calyx exhales with exertion as Crowto asks with determination: so, what's going to be the plan? Crowto suggests blocking the path of retreat with fire arrows, expecting to clamp down on the enemy. Calyx Shiken explodes dramatically, set the forest on fire. He is furious at such a reckless idea. Crowto restrainedly objects, reminding them that the lives of their men are at stake, not just strategy. Calyx cuts him off with cold determination: they can't risk it for a questionable plan. Meanwhile, someone is watching from the top of a tree, lurking among the branches. Calyx Shiken grits his teeth and thinks he knows the monsters better than anyone on the continent, but no one listens to him. A voice comes from above, someone decisively stating that he will stop the fire attack himself. A figure in a blue cloak jumps down, intercepting Calyx and Crowto on the fly. Calyx decides to act directly. He will explain to the Knights of the Order of the Blue Lion what the plan is. From behind a tree, a mysterious figure watches silently, lurking in the shadows. Inside the camp, the plan is being discussed in turmoil while the commander holds a scroll with instructions. Calyx Shiken shouts in rage that this is not a plan at all, but an empty improvisation. He muses grimly that unless they prove their strength, trust is out of the question. Leela, lurking in the shadows, abruptly gives the order to prepare, without further ado or hesitation. Meanwhile, the men in the parking lot begin their preparations, pondering exactly how they are to prove themselves. Calyx Shiken sits alone in the wagon, staring thoughtfully ahead, as if cut off from the hustle and bustle of the camp. He suddenly becomes alert, sensing someone's approach and turning his head to the side. Leela appears in front of him and calmly states that she wants to discuss something important. With a grim expression, she says bluntly, "This plan is doomed, almost everyone involved will die." Crowto, standing outside, replies confidently that he believes in Calyx, even if he has to sacrifice himself. Calyx Shiken lowers his head and says that he too understands. Leela looks at him carefully and asks why he has been silent all this time. Calyx replies sharply that he is not silent, but is racking his brains on how to keep control and save everyone. Leela smiles demurely and says she has an idea worth listening to. Calyx looks up, his gaze becoming sharp. He's willing to listen and assesses her seriously. Leela explains that Sasquatches are fiercely protective of their cubs, putting them above everything else. She adds that the females always run with the cubs while the males fight to buy time. Calyx Shiken nods with tension. He knows this trait, and so things are not going to be easy. Leela is a little surprised, but says she needs to clarify something before continuing. Calyx calmly confirms, their goal is not to destroy the Sasquatch, but to pass by as quietly as possible. Leela confidently says there is a way, they need to make the Sasquolves feel threatened by their lairs. Calyx Shiken listens while she explains, 5 groups are blocking the path they need to take. If distracted by the noise at the cub sites, all the adult Sasquatches will rush to defend them. Calyx admits that he's already thought of that, and if it works, the main squad can get through. He narrows his gaze and asks the key question, who exactly would seek out these lairs and risk attacking? Leela coldly explains that the Sasquatches, in their rage for their cubs, will go to any lengths to protect them. Calyx Shiken cringes in horror, calling such a mission suicidal to go it alone. He freezes in bewilderment, not understanding how she can be so confident and calm. Leela calmly says that she was going to take this case on from the beginning. Calyx, eyes widening, asks suspiciously, does she really have the siren potion? The girl anxiously interjects how he knows such information, her voice sounding frightened. Calyx Shiken calmly explains that it's obvious, she wouldn't go on a mission that amounts to suicide. She, still dumbfounded, says that she's been watching him for a long time and notices how much he's changed. Suddenly, Calyx starts coughing violently and she, frowning, asks if he's okay. Holding back a cough, Calyx replies with a chuckle that if the plan works, he's not that bad at all. Calyx just said that if the plan works, it's not that bad at all, and in response the girl states with an animated smile that she's been running around these places like a playground since she was a kid. He looks at her silently, as if pondering something, and asks why she decided to help him in the first place. She replies with seriousness that if Shakun's family falls, she herself is in danger. Calyx says there's nothing in that to dismiss, so there's no reason not to believe it. He clarifies that acceptance from others may be elusive, and the girl nods quietly, accepting that. Calyx, ducking his head slightly, says he has one single question he wants to ask before she leaves. The girl looks at him with slight surprise and calmly answers for him to ask. He raises his hand and points off into the distance, asking her to look there. Calyx explains that when encountering Sasquatches, one should always assume that there are more of them than one can see. He adds that the hunters will return and attack from the rear, and she eagerly confirms this, eyes wide. The girl points vigorously in 2 directions and asks what he thinks of those points. Calyx looks that way and says with certainty that one of those spots is exactly the right one. He thanks her for the information, adding that it will be handled without too much difficulty, despite the lack of men. She lowers her gaze and calmly clarifies that he will have knights guarding these places, won't he? Then, after a slight hesitation, she adds that she has a couple of personal requests. The cloaked knight, hearing something, raises his head and looks around warily. He notices Calyx along with the girl slowly walking away along the road between the wagons. Calyx turns to her abruptly with surprise and she looks at him seriously without averting her gaze. The girl chuckles and says with a slight sneer that it sounds even too interesting. Calyx is taken aback by her words and, not believing what he hears, says quietly, wait. Calyx, barely looking up, hears her quietly ask, just? And freezes in place. As she moves closer to his face, he mumbles something unintelligible in panic, sweating and blushing. Her lips come very close, and he, dumbfounded, tries to figure out what she's going to do. Calyx is abruptly drenched in color and mentally screams in surprise, what? He turns away, burning with embarrassment, and squeezes his eyes shut, unable to cope with his emotions. Calyx, frowning, mumbles the word trash, not immediately realizing what's going on. The girl explains with a smile that she was simply removing a speck of snot from him, holding it in her hand. Calyx freezes, his face flooding with color, and he exhales quietly, somehow. He internally explodes with shame and compares himself to an otaku running to get his favorite idol's autograph. Calyx hums, trying to save face, but a shout comes from behind him, Prince. The guy in the cape, noticing the commotion, smiles and asks with surprise, what happened? Calyx waves away in panic, loudly stating that nothing happened, while the girl watches silently. He immediately switches gears, ordering him to get the gear ready for Leela. The man looks at Calyx with slight surprise, silently taking the order. Calyx explains that he himself has assigned her the task and asks not to be surprised if she suddenly disappears. One of the knights tensely admits to Calyx that he can't trust the girl yet and asks about the mission. Calyx replies with a slight smile that in that case he should just trust his judgment. Doubtingly, the knight still agrees, but emphasizes that this will be an exception, just this once. When he says he will carry the gear himself, Calyx watches in silence while the other knight exclaims in surprise. In the background, passers-by freeze with their belongings in their hands, not realizing what just happened. The girl calmly fixes her hair while standing in a revealing battle costume, not the least bit embarrassed by the stares. One of the knights blushes in panic and shouts out, confused, "What are you doing?" She glances away glumly, pulling on her glove with a cold expression. Her hands clench into fists. She is fully focused and ready for the task at hand. Calmly walking past, she leaves the knights in shock and stupor, not turning around to look at anyone. One of the guys notices something among the wagons and exclaims delightedly, not hiding his surprise. The girl picks up a container with a thick, dark mass that smells distinctly unappetizing. Grimacing at the aroma, she smears it on her face, trying not to get it in her eyes. He wondered if she was trying to scare off the Sasquatches by rubbing the odor into her skin. Pinching his nose shut, he comments in disgust that she's out of line. This is too much. The sword girl notices that her eye color has changed as expected. She moves abruptly, declaring that she doesn't care about the commotion around her. She doesn't care. With a lightning-fast movement, she soars into the air and lands, mentally noting that her worries were in vain. Turning around to Calyx, she calmly says that it's time to start executing the plan. She offers to take the soldiers with her, but Calyx refuses. They won't listen to him anyway. The girl nods gravely in response to Calyx's words, taking responsibility for the plan. The next moment she soars into the air and walks away, hiding among the trees. Calyx, watching her disappear, commands his men to get ready to go. At this time, strange creatures with dark bodies and curved horns begin to move in the forest. One of the knights, swinging his sword with force, attacks and orders them to end it all in one blow. The knights move in formation as Calyx notices that the wind is blowing directly towards the Sasquatch village. He notes that Leela has gone in the opposite direction, and remembers observing Vera. The Sasquatch's eye flicks open sharply. It has picked up something alarming in the air. The beast slowly turns its head, turning its attention to something outside the frame. A falling petal and a breeze confirm, the Sasquatch has sensed the approach of another scent. The knight strikes with fury with his sword, aiming directly at the Sasquatch, but it hits superficially. He clenches his teeth, realizing that the attack was too weak and missed its target. Calyx, watching from the sidelines, is annoyed that he didn't even hit a vulnerable spot. The guy turns around upon hearing a sharp sound and shouts out anxiously. Sasquatch rushes forward with a roar, bringing his massive fists in for a crushing blow. The forceful blow raises clouds of dust as the fight with the Sasquatch moves into a furious phase. Calyx watches the fight in excitement, thinking it's much cooler than any of the battles on the screen. Sasquatch lunges forward with a deafening roar, completely overwhelmed by the fury. The knight freezes upon hearing this cry, and his comrade behind him tenses up, looking in the same direction. The two Sasquatches begin to rapidly approach, roaring and shaking the ground. Calyx panics, wondering if he should have used fire right away. This is going too badly. One of the knights rushes in with a shout, lifting the entire Blue Lion troop behind him. Calyx shouts in horror for them to wait, but his voice is drowned out in the battle noise. Two warriors introduce themselves, and one of them asks Calyx not to stray too far from the group. Meanwhile, the Sasquatches burst into battle with a roar, and the fight begins with frightening fury. The knight's eyes glare as he concentrates his power and electricity begins to surge around him. With a shout he is reminded not to move away, but he is already immersed in the magical attack. He shouts out the name of the spell, eyes glowing with rage and energy surging around him. A giant pillar of lightning crashes down from above, illuminating the sky with a blinding light. Calyx watches it, awed by the magnitude of the magic encompassing everything in front of him. The noise subsides, and puffs of smoke slowly dissipate over the battlefield. The heavy body falls to the ground with a clatter, leaving behind a dent in the grass. Sasquatch is knocked unconscious and doesn't move again, stunned by the power of the discharge. The boy turns around with a satisfied smile and shining eyes, proudly proclaiming, "Got him." Calyx shouts from a distance, indignantly asking why he's acting like a hero, and tells him to run to the others. The guy in armor clenches his fists and rushes forward with a curse, seeing the impending danger. One of the Sasquatches strikes with a snarl, knocking the knight to the ground, and he cries out in pain. The knight stares in horror at the approaching paw of the enemy, unable to even raise his weapon. The other warrior backs away in panic, but the Sasquatch is almost upon him with heavy footsteps. He turns around, eyes wide with fear, and in the next instant everything is colored red. The monster's fist missed, hitting the ground, and the knight miraculously slipped out of harm's way. The boy with disheveled hair screamed, his face contorted with panic and anger. He thanked the captain and hastily grabbed his sword, jumping away from the approaching enemy. Clenching his teeth, he looked forward and exhaled quietly, realizing there was no time for mercy. The giant swung his arm, and one of the fighters shrieked to himself as he realized that the blow was unstoppable. The giant's fist lashed out again, but the knight dodged the blow with all his might. The monster's massive body shuddered as the blow slammed him into the ground. The boy was breathing heavily, clenching his fists and cursing through his teeth at the endless stream of enemies. The huge foe rushed forward with a roar, and he mentally recognized that even old monsters were dangerous. The fighter's gaze flickered to the side where someone shouted, indicating that the enemy had spotted movement, over there. A huge shadow came crashing down from above, and the fighter barely had time to cover himself, falling to the ground. With a fierce scream, he struck a blow, slicing through the flesh of the monster, and blood spurted out. The enemy howled, throwing back his head, and for a moment lost his balance from the pain. One of the knights shouted that this was their chance, and the men rushed forward. But the other warrior whispered in panic that something was wrong, something had not gone according to plan. One of the warriors frowned, remembering that there had been 8 monsters when he had scouted, but now there were 7. He exhaled sharply and whispered with horror that it didn't mean what he thought it meant. Another beast appeared out of the darkness and its eyes glowed ominously with rage. The boy turned around sharply and with a curse he noticed the beast bearing right at them. With a roar and furious speed, the white beast lunged forward as if aiming to destroy everything in its path. Calyx Shiken tensed sharply as he realized that the beast was heading straight for the prince. He snapped out of his seat, shouting furiously to be stopped as soon as possible. One of the knights panicked and covered the prince with himself, begging him to pull back. Someone screamed in rage, unleashing a powerful stream of blinding energy from above. The light engulfed everything around it, and in it the silhouette standing at the epicenter of the impact was barely distinguishable. Beside Calyx Shiken, the knight gritted his teeth, covering himself with his spear as the flash blinded everyone. The two of them stared at the epicenter of the explosion, and someone asked, did they really manage to get it? The field was covered with a dense cloud of smoke, through which absolutely nothing could be seen. Suddenly, a fist burst through the veil. The monster struck back with fury. One of the knights recoiled in horror as he saw the beast's paw fly out of the darkness in front of him. The knight froze, unable to react as the impact cut violently through the air and blew away everything in its path. The bodies were thrown back, and in flight they were flung helplessly through a blinding column of energy. Calyx Shiken watched unblinkingly as the ground in front of him shattered from the force of the impact. The wind swirled the debris and fog enveloped the field, cloaking everything in a deafening, unsettling silence. Calyx was breathing heavily, eyes dilated. He realized the situation was spiraling out of control. One of the knights exclaimed that the prince must not move away, it was too dangerous to be left alone. The monster rushed forward with a roar, crushing the ground beneath his feet and gaining monstrous speed. Calyx Shiken gritted his teeth, lunged toward it, and shouted a curse at the enemy with fury. He struck with a swing, surrounded by sparkling lightning, piercing the air with all his might. At the same time, another knight stood up in a protective stance, blocking the prince with a tense face. Calyx Shiken clenched his fist and someone called out to Thomas, trying to stop him. He suggested in annoyance that he leave the position and finish this old monster off. Thomas calmly objected that he shouldn't rush in, if he held out, help might come. Calyx interrupted him angrily, shouting that it was pointless to wait, no one would come. Clenching the hilt of his sword, he looked into Thomas's eyes and asked him to think again. Thomas calmly explained that if the soldiers fell, the prince would have to fight 2 enemies at once. He remembered the older knight's orders to never move away from the prince under any circumstances. Calyx Shiken exploded with a shout, accusing him of disobeying his lord's direct order. Thomas clenched his fist at his belt and said firmly that he too was a knight and must defend. He raised his sword and replied firmly that he wanted to fight for his lord, as befits a knight. Calyx Shiken demurely agreed, looking forward with determination in his voice and gaze. The stranger picked his way through the tall grass and whispered that he seemed to have found the right place. Calyx ran forward through the field, feeling that the target was quite close. He exhaled and when he spotted a figure in the distance, he exclaimed that he had finally found him. Calyx shouted Albu's name as someone's body flew aside from the impact. Calyx Shiken's eyes went wide as he was horrified to recognize the man who lay on the ground. Albu was badly wounded, his body barely moving and his armor drenched in blood. Calyx lowered himself down beside him and screamed, begging him not to faint, to hold on. He began urgently stopping the bleeding, hastily pulling off his clothes. Examining his abdomen, Calyx realized that the internal bleeding was serious, but the worst seemed to be over. Calyx Shiken threw the potion away in frustration, realizing that a weak remedy would not help. He raced across the field, thinking that he needed a healer or at least a stronger potion. Clutching his weapon, He whispered under his breath that Albu dare not die. Like a spell, he shouted for him to hold on until he returned. Calyx's cloak soared through the air as he raced away, leaving behind scarlet ribbons of cloth. Calyx Shiken spotted the creature and whispered that Leela had been right, everything was confirmed. He realized that he was in the lair of the Sasquolves, where they were hunting goblins. A huge beast with red fur roared, tearing into its prey with savage fury. Calyx recoiled sharply behind a tree, bracing himself against the bark, gritting his teeth from the exertion. He grimaced and whispered in disgust that the sight was simply disgusting. Calyx Shiken exhaled heavily, clenched his fist and thought he might die. He stared forward with a shiver in his chest and admitted to himself that he was scared. He realized, this wasn't a game or a screen, this was reality, and the trap had worked. His body trembled and the image of a wounded Albu lying on the grass flashed before his eyes. Calyx lowered his head and whispered with stubborn determination that it was okay, he wasn't going to die. Calyx Shiken took a step forward, mentally firmly repeating, he must do this. He called out to the beast, drawing its attention, and stood in a fighting stance with spear in hand. With rage on his face, he screamed that today would be the last day for the enemy. Sasquatch lunged down with a snarl, and Calyx met his gaze without flinching. In the next second he hurled his weapon with force, thrusting it straight into the monster's carcass. The point split the air with incredible speed, aiming precisely at the target. It plunged into the chest of the Sasquatch with force, tearing the flesh and pouring blood all over it. The monster's eyes widened in pain, and it roared, twitching in agony. Its body shook, and a moment later the Sasquatch collapsed to the ground with a clatter. Calyx Shiken stared at his fallen foe, not noticing the new predator already lurking behind. The huge body of the Sasquatch collapsed from above, looming menacingly over Calyx Shiken. Calyx's eyes widened in horror as he realized how close the threat had come. He managed to roll to the side, and the monster crashed to the ground with a clatter. Through clenched teeth, Calyx shouted, swinging his spear, "Take that!" Meanwhile, another massive hand was already clutching the weapon, preparing to strike. The net came down from above, the trap went off, and the Sasquatch was caught in the trapping vines. He growled and struggled, but the thorns were instantly embedded in his body, preventing him from breaking free. Calyx Shiken coldly noted that he had used the arachne vine and added poison. If you apply the siren potion to the tips, most monsters lose resistance. Leela used it to mask the scent, but Calyx knew, the potion had a strong soporific effect. The Sasquatch fell silent in the net, and Calyx Shiken said with satisfaction that it had worked. He slowly sheathed his sword, preparing for the final blow, focused to the utmost. Screaming with force, Calyx lunged forward, putting all his fury into the motion. The monster howled in pain as the blade slammed into him with crushing power. He felt the blade strike bone, and the feeling pierced through him with a pang. Calyx Shiken brings his sword down on his enemy's head in cold blood, shattering the skull with meat and crunch. He is contorted with rage and inner pain, as if he is cutting more than just flesh with each blow. He realizes bitterly that he never wanted to kill, but now it is too late. As he looks at the bloody stakes, he thinks with disgust at how vile it is to take a life himself. The creature aside scornfully remarks that Calyx's opponent was surprisingly weak for his strength. The creature underestimated Calyx Shiken, and a new blow, swift and precise, suddenly comes from above. Everything around it explodes with light and sound, so strong that it is impossible to immediately realize what has happened. Calyx's eye widens with shock as he realizes he didn't have time to react. An opponent appears out of nowhere and with a wild fury stabs his blade right into his stomach. Calyx falls to the ground, breathing heavily, his body shaking from the pain and the suddenness of the attack. Calyx Shiken, barely lifting his head, sees before him an enraged creature with burning eyes. He turns sharply, writhing in pain, but ready to fight to the last man. On the grass lies the body of his opponent, his chest is shredded, and the life has long since left him. Calyx whispers a threat through clenched teeth, blood still trickling down his lips. The creature screams at him, shouting an insult and swinging another blow. Calyx Shiken dodges at the last moment, the blade only cleaving the air near his face. He intercepts the blow, moving instinctively, pressing his feet into the ground and resisting the onslaught. A flash flashes before his eyes, all so fast that his eyes can barely keep up with his movements. With fury and precise calculation, he rushes forward again, not giving the enemy a second's respite. He manages to dodge in close, mentally recognizing that it was damn close. Calyx Shiken realizes he only survived because of his enemy's short arms, pure luck. He looks at his own palm, feeling how pathetic and weak this body is. The creature opposite is preparing to attack, but Calyx notes that its swing is shorter anyway. He quickly calculates, if you add up the length of the sword and arm, it would give a distinct advantage. As the enemy leaps, Calyx tenses up, thinking that the chance to win is not yet lost. Calyx Shiken takes a sharp step to the side, trying to dodge the flying threat. He swings his sword with effort, delivering a powerful chopping blow at the leaping foe. The creature falls from above with a furious expression, its blade almost touching Calyx's skin. Calyx screams to himself in panic, "Hell no!" and tries to push himself back up. The enemy piles on top of him, knocking him down, and both roll on the ground in the chaos of the fight. Calyx Shiken is breathing heavily, thinking that blow might have chopped him down to his shoulder. He is barely up, but already he can see his enemy bearing down on him again with fury. Calyx takes a sharp step forward and strikes with his sword, seeking to retake the initiative. The creature dodges, and Calyx grits his teeth as he waits for the next attack. He raises his leg sharply and strikes the enemy with all his might, knocking it backwards. Calyx Shiken lunges forward with a scream, his sword flying straight at the target. The creature screeches wildly, eyes full of rage and murderous fury. Calyx's blow hits the target, and the enemy flies backwards, knocked down by the powerful outburst of force. He breathes heavily, his face stained with blood, but his eyes flash with relief and anger. Meanwhile, the defeated creature falls helplessly, its body trembling helplessly at the base of the tree. Calyx Shiken kneels down and stares at his defeated foe, nailed to the tree through and through. His face is contorted with shock. He cannot believe he has just done this with his own hands. He looks up, gasping for air with a shaky breath, and clutches the bloody glove. His stomach churns, his throat constricts, and he suddenly begins to choke on the nausea that has set in. Unable to stand it, Calyx turns away behind a tree and convulsively vomits, unable to contain his horror and disgust. Calyx Shiken realizes in a panic, this isn't a game at all, he could really be dead. He breathes heavily, shocked, and whispers that he really thought he was going to die right there. Suddenly, a blue screen appears in front of your eyes, reporting the enemy's kill and reward system. The next message confirms that Calyx has defeated an F-class monster without using traps. He freezes as he reads. His inventory has been opened for his first victory, and his level has risen from 8th to 11th. Calyx Shiken turns around in surprise when he hears someone calling to him in a loud voice. A boy with a sword rushes up to him, shouting his name and asking if he's alright. The young man with disheveled hair freezes in shock when he sees that Calyx is unharmed and standing alive. He glances at the defeated creature and whispers in horror as to what is going on at all. Several people hover over Calyx, panicking and asking questions, and he weakly replies that he's fine. Calyx Shiken listens as his companion says that they are lucky, the enemies have retreated after their losses. He looks away and replies firmly that it was not luck, but a planned decision. He recalls how he naively hoped no one would die, but the reality was brutal. The body of the dead man lies on the ground, and Calyx whispers an apology with pain in his voice. He lowers his head, thinking that if he hadn't been so careless, things might have been different. A line of warriors line up in front of Calyx Shiken, silently observing his condition. One of them comes closer and says that the blame is not on Calyx, for he fell with honor. Calyx jumps up, exclaiming that he is talking nonsense, there is no honor in death. Tears and anger burst out, and he screams that death is just death unadorned. The interlocutor looks calmly and says softly that this is the first time Calyx has lost a subordinate. Calyx Shiken is left sitting by the body, racked with guilt, and only exhales weakly, "Ah." His fallen comrades are stacked in front of him, and he can't take his eyes off their lifeless bodies. The commander on the other side reports that there are 3 dead and 1 wounded in their squad. Calyx lowers his head without answering and mentally admits, it was all his fault. He regrets that he didn't insist. If he had intervened, no one would have died. Calyx Shiken recalls that he survived only because of the traps set in the field beforehand. He bitterly admits that things would have ended differently if Olbu had not covered him with himself. The memory of that moment burns through him as he sees a foot step into the blood-soaked grass. Calyx can't stand it and screams in desperation, his voice breaking into a high-pitched shriek. The warriors nearby turn around, one of them freezing in horror while the other whispers quietly to himself. One of the knights asks thoughtfully what should be done with the bodies of those killed in battle. Without looking up, Calyx Shiken replies that if the situation permits, the bodies should be taken away. He turns his head and adds firmly that they should definitely do so. The squad leader turns back to his own, shouting over the wind and giving orders to all present. But the warriors below suddenly begin to shiver and moan quietly, not realizing what is happening. The warriors, looking at Calyx Shiken, begin to realize how kind he has been for them. One of them raises his hand and swears on his life that he will protect Lord Calyx at all costs. The commander is surprised to notice the expression on everyone's faces change, it's not the fear from before. He is in awe that Calyx has finally won their hearts, despite everything. Calyx steps back to the wagon, and behind him a confident and respectful "My lord" is heard. Calyx Shiken reports that the bodies have been treated with potions and everyone is ready to leave. He looks at the soldiers and is surprised to realize that their gazes on him have changed. Straightened figures stand before him, and he feels it. It is no longer the same tension. He realizes that there is no more time for guilt, he must move forward. With his will in his fist, Calyx steps forward and declares that it is now his duty to give them hope. Calyx Shiken loudly orders the healthy to remember to take care of the wounded. No one is left behind. The warriors respond with one voice, confidently affirming, "Yes, my lord." A light flashes over the forest, and an inscription appears, indicating, "All of this was an hour ago." A foot treads on the soft ground, wearing a light but concealing garment that conceals everything. A figure in a black cloak and mask emerges from behind the trees, hiding his face from view. The bulky beast clenches his fist and brings it down on the figure in black with incredible force. The man instantly jumps sideways, gracefully avoiding the blow and slipping out of the field of attack. He whispers irritably that he has been spotted and clutches his weapon tightly in his palm. The figure makes a swift movement, throwing a sharp spear glinting in the air. The point whizzes by, tearing through the air and into the target at breakneck speed. The beast roared and lunged forward, crushing everything in its path, and she darted sideways, heart-pounding. The predator's roar ripped the air behind her, claws coming within an inch of her neck. She jerked off the ground, slid between the trees, her lips biting down with exertion. The rope shook beneath her grip as she soared upward with all her might without turning around. She burst into the air, her breath coming out with a whoosh, anything just to survive. She landed abruptly, falling heavily to her knees, her back arched, her breath hitching from the impact. Turning over her shoulder, she stopped, her gaze as sharp as a knife blade. The beast leapt out of the thicket with a roar, and the space between them disappeared in a second. Grinning, it lunged forward, claws bearing death, eyes burning with ravenous hunger. At the last moment it jerked sharply to the side, its muzzle contorted, it sensed something. The beast's last hesitation made her realize the bait had worked, its eyes flashing with determination. She exhaled to herself that now it would work, and took a step in front of the beast. The beast roared, but there was uncertainty in its movement, its paws tightened the rope, the trigger activated. It howled and snapped forward sharply, the powerful tug breaking the trap with a crunch, shattering the forest silence. Her eyes widened, her lips quivered, and a single question flashed through her mind: what the fuck? The beast came at her with the force of the storm, paw down, the ground shuddering with the impact. She twisted at the last instant, turning in mid-air, sword flashing in a swift lunge. The rope snapped taut with a crack, wrapping around the carcass, and her body whizzed past in dangerous proximity. A howl of pain tore through the silence as the trap clamped down on the monster's throat, cutting off its breath. She was already far away, bouncing deep into the forest as the beast squirmed, bound and immobilized. She could hardly believe it, but the trap had worked, her breath hitched, her gaze remained wary. The rope woven from the monster's tendons clenched, preventing the beast from breaking free. Even standing directly in front of it, she knew there was no way he could reach her. The bark of the tree crackled under the tension, the trunk began to shake, the effort felt in the air. She growled through clenched teeth, noticing him trying to drop the whole damn forest on top of her. Clutching the syringe in her hand, she mentally reminded herself to inject the potion directly into the blood. The beast lunged forward furiously, and she realized there was no time left, she had to act. A paw swept over her head, but she didn't recoil, just threw her head back, holding her breath. The impact shook the ground, and there was a rumble, as if nature itself was reacting to the beast's fury. She jumped out of the dust cloud, her fingers still gripping the syringe tightly, her chance not lost. She darted forward sharply, bringing the syringe of poison in, eyes full of determination and tension. Her hand trembled halfway through, but she plunged the needle in with precision, not allowing herself to slow down. The potion seeped in, the monster shuddered, letting out a suppressed roar, its body beginning to settle. She exhaled, she'd managed to inject it, but doubt pierced the thought, would it even work? Clenching her fist, she stared forward with grim determination. Now all she had to do was believe. The beast lashed out with fury, the impact of its paw shattering the ground as if it were made of sand. It roared and went on the attack, despite the poison, a wild energy raging through its body. The tree could not withstand the strain, a crack, a crunch, and the thick trunk went sideways. She exclaimed to herself in horror that the tree was falling, too soon, too fast. Meanwhile, the beast's face contorted, darkness spreading through its veins, the poison beginning to take effect. With a look of disbelief on her face she exhaled. It worked, it actually worked. The figure standing in the shadows grudgingly acknowledged. When it came to poisons, she was ahead. Clutching the bloody syringe, she slowly lowered it, her heart still beating unevenly. Regret echoed in her thoughts. He'd changed, he was different, and it felt different every day. Lingering her gaze on the soiled cloth, she thought that maybe it was even better this way. She lowered her head, and a flicker flashed through her mind. She thought revenge was out of reach, but she was wrong. Calmly turning around, she walked through the sunlight into the forest shadows, whispering to herself, maybe. Kalix Shiken stood against the wall, his face hiding the tension, his gaze heavy and penetrating. Warriors emerged from behind the trees, one supporting the other, their steps slow and tired. Kalix looked to the side and said they should stop for a while and catch their breath. One of the warriors loudly confirmed the order, not hiding the surprise in his voice or the slight anxiety. The three warriors sat wrapped in bandages when a tall shadow suddenly appeared before them. Kalix Shiken approached with a basket of potions and calmly offered, "Drink this." One of the wounded men looked surprised, not believing the potion was meant for him, and questioned confusedly. Kalix abruptly told him to just drink it and recover, and the soldiers hastily obeyed without arguing. One of the knights ran up to Kalix Shiken in a panic, not believing he was seeing him in person. Kalix threw a tired look and muttered that the most troublesome of the lot had shown up. The embarrassed warrior began to make excuses, saying that the potion, though simple, cost a lot of money. Kalix calmly explained that the 10 bottles were half of the Viscount's personal reserve. Then he boiled up, asking with fury if he should calmly watch the wounded suffer. Embarrassed and clearly confused, the knight began to make excuses, hastily stating that he had been misunderstood. Silence hung over the camp. The warriors watched in silence, tensely listening to the conversation. He finally looked up and spoke confidently, saying not to worry, everything would be fine. Kalix Shiken, holding out potions, remarked that such potions would become commonplace after this campaign. The knight wanted to add something, but Kalix was suddenly wary, turning around sharply with worry in his eyes. The warriors stood in a row and bowed their heads, showing Kalix Shiken respect without further ado. He lowered his gaze, uttering a quiet "ah," as if he had not expected such a response. A man would give his life for someone who recognizes him. That's true loyalty. The comrade hurried Kalix with a smile, noticing that his face had become too serious. Turning around, Kalix calmly replied that he understood and moved towards the wagon. Kalix Shiken raised his eyebrows in surprise when a strange pop-up message appeared in front of his eyes. He saw an inscription that the support level had increased, from 14% to 18%. A satisfied, slightly cheeky smile slowly appeared on his face, and he loudly commanded, "Move out." The caravan of wagons moved off, stretching in a chain along the forest road, wheels squeaking. Looking ahead with determination, Kalix said confidently, "Let's get moving." At the command "stop," the whole troop instantly froze, the wagons stopped, tension hung in the air. Kalix Shiken jumped to the ground and calmly announced that they had arrived at their destination. One of the knights looked around bewildered and wondered if this was the hiding place. He noted that there were no guards or signs of life around, perhaps the place had long been abandoned. When asked about Leela, Kalix frowned and said there was no word and they had no choice. Kalix Shiken confidently gave the order to set up camp at this very spot without wasting a second. He specified that the tent would be set up right where he was standing now. Later, after gathering the command staff, Kalix said that he assumed the target was nearby. He pointed to the map, explaining, "The secret vault of Viscount Kosheran's family must be here." When asked if it was underfoot, Kalix said no, it was a little farther from the camp. One of the knights burst out and exclaimed that it wasn't a long journey at all, a week's journey. Kalix Shiken coldly reminded him that so far the soldiers had only traveled on pure will. He added, "If you tell them that the march will continue for another week, half of them will definitely surrender." Silence hung in the room as he looked at the map, and his interlocutor clenched his fists with tension. Another warrior intervened anxiously. If they lingered here, the enemy would sense their presence. Kalix Shiken waved him off irritably and told everyone to stop whining. It was time to listen. He clarified that he was only pointing out the location of the hiding place, but he wasn't saying that they would go there. The knight cringed, reminding them that the purpose of the mission was to steal the enemy's cash, wasn't it? Kalix turned around and explained, they would go inside through the entrance, which is right here. He took a step towards the hidden location, at which point he warily turned around, sensing something strange. A hatchway rumbled open right under his feet, and the air was filled with dust and the smell of dampness. Kalix Shiken calmly approached the hatch, not showing a bit of fear of the unknown. The fighters froze in shock as they stared at the opening of the passage. The anxiety was clear on their faces. Kalix raised his head, staring at the grate as if checking his plan against reality. He stepped forward, standing confidently on the edge of the descent, while the others watched in silence. Calyx Shiken turned sharply at the knight's shout, and tension instantly hung in the air. He stepped closer to the gaping hole in the floor, and quietly, surreptitiously whispered what the place was. One of the knights pushed him back in a panic, terrified that he was about to step inside. The others shouted, visibly panicked, and rushed towards Calyx, literally yanking him out of the passage. Calyx, with a face full of annoyance, gritted his teeth. "Do what you want, I don't care." Calyx Shiken, with a cold look up from below, asked the soldier where he got this information from. He admitted with a wry smile that he looked pathetic himself, and surprised that he was believed at all. The knight was confused, excusing himself that he didn't mean it, clearly feeling embarrassed. A second knight with a serious face stepped in and said firmly that he believed Calyx. He added with a slight smile that if a leader valued even a simple soldier, he could be trusted. After the words about trusting the leader, the other knights one by one eagerly declared that they too trusted Calyx. Calyx, overwhelmed by their loyalty, muttered that it was the highest honor to die for a just cause. One of the knights exhaled in genuine surprise, amazed at how moved Calyx was by what was happening. Calyx looked down at the floor and admitted that he was still the same loser, unable to even use mana. But one of the knights replied with a soft smile that true strength is within, not in physical power. Calyx Shiken froze, looking at the knights with a shocked expression, barely restrained emotion in his eyes. One of the soldiers sobs, wiping his eyes, and confesses that he is moved to tears by Calyx's trust. At that moment, Calyx raises his voice sharply, reminding them that there are wounded and dying outside. There can be no delay. One of the knights bows to him, confirming the order, determination, and respect in his voice. Calyx turns toward the light, his face calm but his eyes still burning with anxious determination. As Calyx and his squad descend into the dungeon, somewhere in the forest someone hopes they are doing well. Leela stands bloodied, breathing heavily, her face stained with fresh blood. She clutches a small vial in her hand and drips something next to the body of the defeated monster. Turning around, Leela slowly walks away from the corpse, clearly convinced that it is finally dead. Wiping the sweat from her face, she exhales and says with confidence that this time it was done properly. Leela stands in front of the cave entrance, looking inward appraisingly, and tells herself it's time to get started. She flicks a lighter, tosses something to the side, and with a predatory grin promises fun with fire. After that, she quickly walks away without wasting a second and deftly jumps into a tree, hiding in the crowns. Sitting on a branch, she watches as the smoke attracts all the Sasquatches to the designated spot. Leela turns around with cold determination in her eyes, mentally noting that the real threat is just around the corner. Leela watches from above as figures in black cloaks and masks emerge from the forest, moving cautiously. They approach the body of the slain beast, unaware that they themselves are already in the crosshairs. Leela, hiding behind a tree, scornfully calls them cockroaches and rejoices that her premonition has come true. She clutches the cylindrical object in her hand and mentally says that now they will know what it means to betray. Leela's eyes sparkle with cold fury, and she defiantly declares that she will personally show them payback. One of the enemies grabs a feather in panic, mentally shouting that the situation is an emergency. He examines the battle scene and notices that there is no trace of the bodies, not even bones. With an anxious face, he concludes that someone was able to repel the Sasquatch attack and clean up everything. His eyes widen as he realizes, only one place in the vicinity could have pulled this off. He immediately decides that he must report the matter to Viscount Servio without wasting a second. Leela watches carefully from her hiding place, her eyes as cold as a dagger blade before it strikes. She notices the enemy hermetically sealing the bags, and immediately recognizes the method for the hunter's accountability. Her face contorts with contempt as she whispers that it's the same technique for reconnaissance and secret reports. A gust of wind touches her cloak, and Leela instantly notes that the wind is blowing directly in their direction. Without wasting a second, she clutches the vial tighter in her hand, preparing for her next move. Leela throws something forward with lightning precision, and the next instant there is a splash of blood. The projectile slams into the tree with terrifying force, splattering the enemy's blood across the bark and air. One of the remaining enemies, before he realizes what is happening, raises a strange object in his hands. But Leela is already out of sight, hiding in the foliage like a shadow escaping the light. And then the forest explodes in flames, everything around them is on fire, and the bodies of the enemies are rushing around in panic. Sasquatch burst out of the blazing forest with a roar of fear and rage. One of them, with a wound on his forehead, clenches his fists, seething with anger, preparing to strike back. An even more massive beast appears in the distance, and its deafening snarl sears to the bone. The creatures lunge into the flames without hesitation, staring frantically and foaming at the mouth. Meanwhile, The watcher in the tree is shocked. An entire elite unit has been destroyed, and it must be reported immediately. A branch breaks under his weight with a crack, and the forest explodes with a burst of noise and panic. One of the enemy, breathing heavily, hides behind a tree and whispers, trying to convince himself that he has evaded the chase. But suddenly a spearhead bursts from the foliage, plowing into his side, blood flying sideways. The sword freezes, covered in fresh blood, and the attacker's breath sounds deafeningly over the defeated victim. He gasps, horrified to ask who it was, already realizing that the end is near. A body falls swiftly from the foliage from a height. With a thud it crashes to the ground. Leela landed beside it, bending her knees gently and immediately standing up like a predator after a precise throw. Without looking at her bloodied foe, she searches through his clothes until her fingers come across the document she needs. Clutching the sheet, Leela exhales in relief. She's finally found what she's been looking for all this time. Without hesitation, she tosses the body to the monsters and walks off into the forest without turning around. As Leela disappears into the forest, a huge Sasquatch approaches the body of a dead enemy and begins sniffing it. He leans closer, inhaling the scent of blood, as if checking to see if the man is really dead. Once satisfied, the beast rises to its full height and growls, as if realizing that this is the work of an outsider. Meanwhile, Calyx Shiken descends the stone stairs with the knights, holding a light in his hand. He explains with irritation that the hermit wizard created this place, wanting to quietly do research until his death. Calyx Shiken mutters irritably that no one in their right mind would set traps in their home. The knight, ignoring his tone, insists that he still needs to make sure it's safe. He brings his hand to the wall and is surprised to note that the surface is perfectly smooth, without a single seam. According to him, this passageway was not created by digging, but by the magic of melting the earth and then crystallizing it. Another knight concludes that such enchantments could only be created by an archmage of at least 8th class. Calyx Shiken says with a sneer that in such a place the enemies would not even notice that they were roasted alive. The knight stares at him silently, not knowing how to respond to such black irony. Ahead, the corridor suddenly widens, revealing a spacious hall with columns and arranged furniture. The commander gives out orders abruptly, Thomas guarding Calyx, the others breaking into groups and scouring the hall. Calyx turns to Kraut, reminding him that potions of medium level and above should be given to the wounded. Calyx Shiken plops noisily into a chair and exclaims loudly, as if relieved for a moment. One of the knights hesitantly asks if this is really all just a fluke. Calyx closes his eyes and ponders aloud. Maybe Viscount Kosherin was helped by someone to reach these ruins. The knight frowns, recalling that the enemies even got a magic crystal for surveillance. At that moment, Calyx's eyes widen, and he realizes there is clearly something much bigger in front of them. Calyx Shiken examines the old grate and thinks that even the weakened magic here is too powerful for an ordinary mage. When asked who is standing over Viscount Servio, he calmly replies that it is Marquis Antonio. With a focused look to the side, Calyx quietly utters that they urgently need to begin preparations. One of the knights reports that the mid-level potions have been gathered and the place looks safe. Calyx briefly orders the potions to be taken to the wounded, and the knights immediately nod readily to carry out the order. One of the knights sadly remarks that the items found are too expensive to give away so easily. Calyx Shiken calmly replies that he understands his feelings, but the wounded cannot be abandoned, there will be enough supplies. He specifies that in addition to potions, crystals, gems and some herbs for experiments were found. The knight adds that they also found artifacts with support magic, but nothing really valuable. Calyx begins to look around, thinking that somewhere in here there must be a truly important artifact displayed in status. Calyx Shiken freezes abruptly, staring at the far wall and exclaims that he's found it, it's there. He reaches out his hand, lunging towards the wall as something in it draws him in with an unstoppable force. The knight asks in surprise what's going on, but Calyx is already fully focused on his discovery. He irritably throws out that he'll do as he pleases because no one would have stopped him anyway. Glancing at the wall, he thinks that somewhere in here there must definitely be a lever that opens the secret door. Calyx flinches at the rumble echoing down the hallway and silently presses his lips together with tension. He walks beside the man, footsteps thudding as if leading them into an abyss. When a glittering hall opens up before them, Calyx stops and whispers quietly that this can't be true. He looks down in a daze. The circular room is full of screens and pulsing lights like the heart of a machine. Calyx frowns and says it's definitely a surveillance camera, and the man clarifies, you can see every part of the ruins. Calyx frowns at the screens and admits that there's something fucking weird about the place. The man claims to have fully explored the ruins, but never stumbled upon a room like this. Calyx wrinkles his forehead and repeats his words out loud. Fake ruins, seriously, that sounds like bullshit. He explains that mages used to create fake halls to confuse people like them. Calyx is dumbfounded when he hears that this is the Kosherin family's secret vault and their main target. Calyx confidently confirms that yes, they can indeed steal the secret funds without breaking into the vault. He places his hands on the orb and concentrates until the energy responds with a thud. The man notices how deftly Calyx handles the artifacts and assumes he has a talent for magic in him. A rumble suddenly shakes the walls, and the man blurts out anxiously what the hell that sound just was. He rushes into the passage and shouts that he can see from there too, clearly having stumbled upon something unexpected. The man turns around sharply and exclaims in surprise that there is a new door in the wall. He steps closer, clarifying that the passage leads straight to the false ruins. Calyx excitedly points his hand in the direction and asks to go to the panel first. He explains that through the control device, multiple locations can be viewed simultaneously. After careful analysis, Calyx confirms, Gerard is using the false ruins as his personal secret vault. Calyx notices a strange door on the screen and is surprised to whisper that it wasn't there before. He immediately realizes it is the entrance to a silver mine hidden inside the false ruins. The man is dumbfounded, guessing how the silver was mined, bypassing royal control. They don't see a single person, everything seems dead, as if no one has been there for a long time. Calyx says quietly what a shame, and the man clenches his fists and swears, he won't let it go. Calyx says glumly that the main thing is to not let it happen again, under any circumstances. The man suggests changing the security codes and connection settings to shut down access permanently. Calyx grins gloatingly, deciding to leave a little parting gift as a parting gift. He asks that he remember to put the pre-prepared scroll down and distribute the silver to the expedition members. When the man asks what the matter is, Calyx replies that he can handle it himself and let him go. The man grudgingly agrees, promising to complete the task and return as soon as possible. He walks away down the corridor, leaving Calyx alone with the glowing hall and panels. Calyx exhales in relief, throwing up his hands and whispering that he is finally alone. He fumbles for a hidden panel on the wall, remembering that the needed mechanism must be here somewhere. With breathless joy, Calyx finds the recess and speaks aloud, "There you go, bitch." Calyx looks at the artifact and whispers that it was familiar in the game, but in person, it's different. He activates the panel, throwing out a short "oh well," and watches the system's reaction carefully. The description of the artifact pops up in front of him, a shield that saves you from death, but with severe limitations. Calyx smiles, recognizing that with his weak combat strength, this find is just perfect. He clutches the amulet in his hand and says it's like he now has 3 lives to spare. Calyx is about to leave, but suddenly freezes, sensing something strange in the room. He turns his head with tension and mutters quietly, Seeing the writing on the wall, Calyx squints and wonders what the hell it is. He notices that the letters are black, shimmering and seeming to glow through the stone. Calyx tenses as he reads the beginning, Hecatoria. But beyond that the language becomes incomprehensible, at least something is familiar to him. Calyx remembers that the name Hecatoria was glimpsed in the game, the goddess who gave humans a magic system. He's wary about whether what's happening is connected to his arrival in this world, since it wasn't in the game. As soon as he touches the inscription, lightning bolts erupt from the wall and pierce the air with a sharp crackle. Calyx is tossed into the air, everything around him distorted, symbols rushing past as if in a mad vortex. He falls into the darkness, screaming that he can't see anything and doesn't realize where the hell he is. Calyx, still falling into the unknown, suddenly notices a strange symbol in front of him, surrounded by burning spheres. He stunned asks himself if this is the most divine being he has heard of. The symbol pulses and seems to come to life, and Calyx whispers to himself that these are gods. He cries out no. In horror, feeling something unknown begin to take over his consciousness. Bending over in pain, Calyx asks in a hoarse voice what is happening, as the words seem to cut straight into his brain. Right after Calyx feels the words crashing into his mind, a girl appears and screams in despair that this is inhuman. A voice from the flames mockingly reminds her that humans aren't here, and she isn't human either. He states that the decision has already been made by the majority. The goddess Hecatoria has agreed to it. The girl breathes heavily and admits through gritted teeth that she cannot accept such violence. Flame coldly pronounces that since she longs so much to be human, it is truly pathetic. The blazing voice promises to grant her wish, and a devastating magical ritual erupts around her. The girl squirms inside the raging flames, as if her very body is being torn apart. Calyx feels it like a song, horrible, chilling, though there is no sound at all. He tries to focus, but the tension in the air presses on his mind, causing him to shiver inside. The magic reaches its climax, blasting the space with a flash that engulfs everything around it in a bright light. After the furious explosion of magic, the figure in the center of the circle screams, its body blazing with distorted power. Calyx clasps his head with his hands and screams in panic that he can't take it anymore. He recognizes the name, Hecatoria, and screams it, looking desperately into the distorted entity. The voice Riley says that her name is now inappropriate, for she has fallen to the level of a demigod. It adds that from now on she will be an object of contempt, even for the people she loves. The voice mockingly tells her that she will be destroyed by the very lowly people she was protecting. He adds with eerie pleasure that he can't wait to see her face in that moment. Calyx wakes up with a scream, as if snapping out of a nightmare, with his breath hitching to a spasm. He leans heavily against the wall and whispers in a squeezed voice, wondering if it's finally over. A text flashes on the panel in front of him, and Calyx utters in confusion, Calyx yells out in utter shock that it's a power-level ability, not believing what he's seen. The screen confirms it. He has received a fragment of Hecatoria's first power, Kill Pain Atellum. He tensely ponders that skills usually go from F to S, but this is different. Calyx realizes, power isn't just power, it's something of an entirely different order. It is the kind of power only demigods can use, for it is the very essence of yourself. Calyx squints, noticing that the panel continues to work, and wonders if there is anything else. The screen informs him that his soul has been enhanced after absorbing the power fragment, increasing in rank. He looks up and recognizes with firm conviction, whoever sent him here was clearly not mistaken. A vision of the goddess appears, and Calyx realizes, only power-level abilities can hurt a god. He grins, breathing heavily, and utters a short grim heh, as if accepting a challenge. Calyx bursts out laughing madly, and asks with a chuckle if this isn't the final goal of this whole game. He admits that he hates being manipulated, but now he has no choice. With grim determination, he says he'll go through with it all to the end, no matter what it takes. When Kraut returns, Calyx calmly asks if he's had time to endure everything. Kraut is a little confused looking at Calyx, and asks him not to be frightened by what he's about to see. Calyx freezes with slight confusion, not immediately realizing where this is going. When he sees the contents of the warehouse, his eyes widen and he exclaims in delight. A whole treasure trove of goods has opened up before him, barely enough time to haul it all in. Kraut reports that 6 of the crates are full of gold coins, about 30,000. Calyx smiles happily and admits that he didn't expect that. Kraut waves happily and reports that 420 crates of silver bars have been collected. He admits that this wealth would be hard for a normal expedition to take out, even with all his efforts. Calyx hums and clarifies if that means they have too much gold now. He looks at the mountain of wealth and says with cold certainty that it won't be a problem. A grim image pops into his mind, a hanged creature with a wound in its chest, as if a reminder. Calyx Shiken realizes with a greedy gleam in his eyes, he now has an inventory. He exhales, as if he's been holding back excitement, and suggests starting with the crates to check the system. His servant is lost, but Calyx, with a cheerful wink, gives the short order without an ounce of hesitation. When all the crates are finally assembled, Calyx clarifies if they are finished and receives an affirmative answer. Wasting no time, he calmly but firmly orders that everyone prepare to return. A servant asks with slight confusion what Calyx Shiken is going to do with all these crates. He just watches the pile of goods, realizing that no one in this world would understand what inventory is. Calyx decides it's pointless to explain, and will just figure out how to hide the truth. When a servant voices a doubt about the storage, Calyx responds with a slight smirk. He shows the artifact and explains that the subspace bracelet will hold all that junk. The servant widens his eyes in shock, not believing that Calyx Shiken had such an artifact. Calyx chuckles and says he'd rather keep it a secret for safety's sake. He quietly thanks for his help and stands alone among the crates, preparing for his next action. As he focuses on the object, he feels his attention trigger some internal mechanism. A status window appears before Calyx's eyes, bright, digital, as if ripped from another reality. Calyx Shiken mentally utters the word inventory, trying to activate the function through concentration. A response appears on the screen in front of him, and he whispers excitedly that everything is working. He excitedly compares it to the game. Now you can store artifacts right in your inventory. The box begins to flicker and disappears, dissolving into light as if it had been sucked inside the system. The panel displays the result. The artifact has been successfully stored, confirming his new control over space. Calyx Shiken exclaims with excitement that everything is working, and decides to download everything at once. Neat stacks of coins and items appear on the screen, and he grins contentedly. Relieved, he leaves the vault, muttering that it's time to go back. His footsteps echo down the stairs as he slowly makes his way up. Upstairs he is greeted with a cheer and Calyx steps out of the shadows, confident and calm. After Calyx Shiken has risen, he is greeted by his knights, reporting ready to depart. He turns around in surprise and interjects, clearly something is bothering him. Calyx asks his companion if Lyle has shown up, but he gets a negative answer. The companion expresses doubt, suggesting betrayal, and admits that he didn't believe her from the beginning. Calyx, frowning and clenching her fists, turns to him with anger in her voice. Calyx Shiken stares intently and asks with a challenge if the man still believes in the coincidence of the retreat. The companion freezes with a dumbfounded expression, clearly not expecting such a turn. Calyx continues in a subdued voice, but there is tension and determination in every word. The one he is addressing grows darker, as if realizing that something serious is behind this. He exclaims in panic that it would be suicide to go into the Sasquatch lair alone. The companion admits with despair that he thought poorly of Lily, but did not wish such a doom for her. Calyx Shiken calmly but wittily reminds him exactly who ridiculed his method, calling it an adventure. Now that Lily never returned, he concludes, something definitely happened to her. Calyx, looking straight ahead, says that thanks to her they were able to avoid casualties, and now it's their turn to help. He turns to the knights and confirms with firmness, it was Lily who saved them all. A knight shoutingly confirms Calyx Shiken's order, shouting it with devotion in his voice. Calyx smiles, and someone hisses with disdain that the whole thing is pathetic. The rest of the knights shout for Lily's help, but guilt gnaws at the back of one of their minds. He clenches his fist and decides that as a knight, he must fulfill his duty to the end. Calyx instructs him to choose a rescue party and orders the others to stay in the cellar. Calyx Shiken speculates that Lily could have fallen either to the former leader of the Sasquatch or to her pursuers. He confidently rules out the latter. Lily's organization doesn't know where they are now. Remembering how Lily erased all traces, he's convinced that she couldn't have been foolishly caught. The knights stand in indecision, and one wonders aloud how to find her now. At that moment, Calyx's gaze changes dramatically, and he breaks the silence with excitement. A companion asks what Calyx Shiken will do now, and wonders if everyone is already gathered. Calyx glumly informs him that they are heading to the leader of the Sasquatch to avenge Lily. He asks in shock if he's serious, and Calyx hands him a package with a short explanation. With pressure, he orders him not to ask any more questions and to simply complete the task. Calyx then raises his eyes forward and promises Lily to himself that they will definitely get to her. Calyx Shiken assesses the cave and notices that only females and cubs should be left inside. He orders a sweep to begin while the males are busy either hunting or chasing after Lily. One of the knights doubts the plan, reminding him that the Sasquatches are serious adversaries. Calyx replies with cold certainty that all will become clear once they see the effects of the poison. The knight stares in amazement at the sword coated in the poisonous compound, amazed at its power. Calyx Shiken takes the first decisive step towards the lair, launching an attack. The creatures inside the cavern react with a wild roar, panicking as they try to defend themselves. The knights rush forward on command, swords drawn, not wasting a second. An explosion comes from the depths, and a powerful wave of energy shakes the greenery at the entrance. Calyx turns around sharply and orders them to take cover. The goal now is to track the male's tracks. The Sasquatch with a roar escapes into the forest, leaving powerful footprints behind them. Calyx Shiken calls out to the squad, everyone must move immediately after the fugitives. The tracks are indeed clear, and he and his partner run forward along the trail without hesitation. Frames flash in the dynamics. The fighters are striving forward, full of determination and speed. One of the knights confidently declares that Lily could not have fallen from the weaklings. The target is clear, the largest trails. Calyx Shiken gives the command to move out, and the squad rushes forward with shouts of encouragement. He runs swiftly through the forest, never taking his eyes off the deep Sasquatch tracks. One of his companions suddenly asks if he's in love with Lily, and it throws off his momentum. Calyx abruptly cuts the conversation short, insisting that only the chase matters now. The companion, already more serious, admits that he didn't expect Lily to volunteer for such a dangerous mission. Calyx Shiken thinks about how Lily realized that they needed her more than she was showing. He recalls her genuine smile fame she could have gained easily, but she refused to give it up. Perhaps it was all because she lived with a constant sense of needing to survive. He thinks back to the upcoming big event, the invasion of the Jaiburu kingdom and the role of the mountain rangers. But now he doubts, maybe Lily and the others weren't just volunteers, but someone's carefully cultivated project. Kraut stands in silence among his defeated enemies, sword in hand and relief on his face. He is surprised to realize that the battle is over, and exclaims joyfully in victory. The knights confirm, all the enemies have been destroyed, and none of them are hurt. Kraut turns around sharply, ordering them not to relax, they are about to meet the Lord. He rushes forward through the forest, followed by his squad, ready to report to Calyx Shiken on their success. Kraut runs with a radiant smile, full of admiration to Calyx Shiken, asking only one thing: to be safe. At the same time, someone hiding in the darkness says a mental goodbye and wishes him to stay alive. A bloodshot gaze flickers in the grass, half closed, but still alive and filled with tension. Calyx suddenly freezes abruptly upon hearing something unusual, his face expressing anxious surprise. The next second his eyes widen with shock. He has clearly seen something that has shaken him to the core. Calyx Shiken cries out Leela's name in desperation after seeing her lying motionless, surrounded by wolves. He rushes into the fray, swinging his sword with fury, clearing a path. A companion calls for a retreat while Calyx continues the battle, never taking his eyes off of Leela. Running up to her, he kneels down and begs her to wake up, his voice shaking with excitement. He examines the wound and realizes with dismay that the damage is far more serious than he had hoped. Calyx Shiken pours the potion over the wound, watching as the magical light begins to tighten the skin. He winces in relief when he notices that Leela is breathing, she's alive. Realizing that it will take time to fully recover, he decides to start by getting her drunk. When the knight reports the beast's retreat, Calyx thanks and asks for help turning Leela. He carefully brings the vial to her lips, causing the potion to slowly drip inside. Calyx Shiken watches her breathing carefully, the tension subsiding when he sees she's better. The boy beside him breaks into a joyous cry, his face glowing with relief and delight. Calyx sits down on the grass, exhales, and with a chuckle throws, "They made it in time, right at the right moment." Time jumps forward a week. Count Shiken's castle looms, cold and silent. Calyx stands covered in sweat, jaw clenched, breath hitching. Something has clearly gone wrong. Calyx Shiken runs across the courtyard, his face twisted with exertion, his breathing heavy, but he doesn't stop. He beats out a rhythm with his footsteps on the dusty ground, holding back a groan of exhaustion through clenched teeth. A thought pops into his head: his combat level is 18, and for a 15-year-old that's pretty damn good. One of the men notices that despite the short period of training, his stamina has increased dramatically. The other snickers. Calyx clearly has a strong body, and his progress is almost frighteningly fast, suspicious even. Calyx Shiken, hearing the exclamation behind him, only grins, not slowing his stride. With a fierce glint in his eyes, he thinks his journey to power is just beginning. One of the men raises the question of continuing training, but receives a restrained answer: there is no hurry. The guy in white wonders if it's already over, but he hears that there are other things to do today. He repeats with amazement: a magic tower? Clearly not expecting such a turn. Calyx Shiken wipes himself with a towel and asks him to prepare for a visit to the tower branch. The short-haired boy replies that he understands, watching him with slight respect. The older man admits that he doesn't fully understand Calyx, but one thing is certain. He cannot fathom all of his abilities. Calyx is too talented even for a seasoned warrior. The younger man adds that Calyx genuinely cares about people, and he won't let doubts get in the way. The older man admits that at first his job was only to keep an eye on Calyx Shiken. Now he struggles to keep up with his thoughts, and the young man still needs a mentor. They agree that Calyx does not have an official title, but with such progress it is only a matter of time. When Count Korin died, troubling clouds thickened over the land, and it was unsettling. Calyx dives in, and a thought is heard off-screen: the son of a lion also becomes a lion. Calyx Shiken arrives at a branch of a magical tower hidden amongst dense trees. Inside the tower is a dizzying view of a spiral library studded with books. They are invited to enter with a welcoming smile, and Calyx takes a step forward, slightly wary. The woman with glasses ahs at the sight of the guests, surprised by their appearance and unexpected visit. With delight she exclaims that handsome men are always desirable, and Calyx is shocked at such an encounter. Calyx Shiken thanks with slight confusion as they are seated at the table in a friendly manner. The short-haired boy wonders to himself if the magician is acting too freely, without deference. The woman leans over, gracefully extending her hand and offering them tea as if it were a royal reception. As the dishes begin to shake from the magical vibration, Calyx and his companion freeze abruptly. Calyx watches in suspense as the magical woman serves the tea, cautiously taking a seat on the couch. The woman takes the teapot in her hands with such care as if she were holding an artifact of the highest class. When steam begins to rise from it, it piques Calyx's anxious interest. He frowns, watching intently, and wonders to himself, is this what he thinks it is? The internal information window confirms. They have a high-ranking mage in front of them in a normal branch. The woman comments on this with a smile, as if teasing, surprised, aren't they? The woman laughs into her palm and asks with a sly smile why Calyx Shiken is so surprised. He honestly replies that he didn't expect to meet such an elegant sorceress in the countryside. The guy with the short hair begins to suspect if this woman is his type, looking at Calyx. Calyx calmly remarks that if she can heat a teapot instantly, her level is no lower than 5th. He adds with a shadow of respect that such a thing is almost impossible to achieve without training from the Tower Master himself. The mention of age confuses everyone, and Calyx Shiken mumbles uncertainly that 20s is serious. He lowers his head, as if caught by an awkward assumption, and wrinkles his forehead desperately. The woman cheerfully admits she's in her 30s, though she looks much younger. Calyx admires her looks with a smile and jokingly wonders if she's hiding a secret. The guy with the short hair replies that he just gets plenty of sleep and washes his face with clean water, much to everyone's amazement. Sunlight floods the room, where a slight magical silence hovers between cups and books. The magician, as if waking up from her chatter, asks why Calyx Shiken has come today. The short-haired boy sighs in relief as the conversation finally turns to business. Calyx calmly replies that he wants to buy a scroll with an explosion spell. The woman exclaims in surprise, pressing her palm to her chest as if she didn't expect such a request. Calyx Shiken smiles as the magician admiringly calls him an important and valued customer. She offers a discount. Instead of 600 gold for 30 scrolls, he will pay only 500. Calyx remarks with a satisfied grin that being handsome is indeed profitable. The woman assures with a slight laugh that the branch manager always has the right credentials. With a smile on her lips, she adds that she has another request and asks not to be shy. Calyx Shiken cautiously begins the conversation, recognizing that the request will not be an easy one. He bluntly states that he would like to borrow money from the reserve fund. The magica opens her eyes wide. The very mention of this fund clearly shocks her. Discreetly but curiously, she asks how much money he needs. When Calyx names 60,000 gold, she chokes on her tea in surprise. The guy with the short hair explains that he can't just dispose of such a large sum. Calyx Shiken assures her that he will leave the gold and silver as collateral and pay the interest. The sorceress raises her glasses, clarifying interest, so it's serious. Inwardly, Calyx recognizes that if he gives up the money stolen from Gerard's stash, it would be like a confession. He decides that if he's borrowing the money, he should pay the interest to keep things honest. Calyx Shiken clenches his hand into a fist, deciding that there is no other place to borrow such a sum. The woman bows her head regretfully. She can't just hand over that money. Calyx wonders with annoyance if his affection for her was not enough. He realizes that his superiors would probably say no, and that annoys him even more. But in the next second, determination flashes in his gaze. There is only one way to accomplish his goal. The magica, with a finger pressed to her lips, offers with a sly smile to keep everything between them. A round table and 2 guests are seen from above. One of them clarifies, "Will it be a secret for 3? She calmly replies that there will be no problem if returned within 6 months. Calyx Shiken grins slyly, realizing that everything is going exactly as he had hoped. The woman sips her tea with relish. She is clearly not attracted by the situation, but by the lust for the interest on the 60,000. Calyx Shiken and his companion lean forward gratefully, asking to participate in the affair. Calyx grins grimly, mentally drawing a line. His debt to the magician is now closed. Elsewhere, someone in a panic cries out for the map, ordering it to be brought immediately. A man in dark clothing grits his teeth and clenches his hand with force, cursing furiously. He anxiously reports that one of the patrols checking the secret vault has disappeared without a trace. The man stares tensely at the map, marking the spot where the trail of the missing patrol broke off. The map shows a path, winding through the mountains and a straight line to the place marked with a circle. He is dumbfounded. The direct route would take only 1 day to reach the place. Clenching his fist, he exclaims in horror, "Is this really possible?" With a loud order he demands to set off immediately for the mountains, and receives an instant reply, "Got it." From the clouds of dust and the crackling of rocks, a huge figure appears. It is a golem, and it moves forward. One of the fighters is terrified to recognize it, a stone golem, an invincible hulk from ancient legends. The commander orders them to remain calm. Despite their size, such creatures are slow. But the golem suddenly unleashes a fist of furious force, shaking the ground around it. The fighters raise their heads and scream. The attack is too massive, it's impossible to dodge. The golem unleashes a terrifying blow with terrifying force, crushing the fighter who failed to dodge. One of the remaining men watches in shock, screaming. He simply cannot believe what is happening. They realize, if even high-level fighters have fallen so quickly, their chances are slim to none. Hidden in the forest, the others lay low, but one of them notices something and whispers in surprise. At that moment the giant rises again, his footsteps shaking the ground, bringing a new threat. One of the fighters lies unmoving, his face covered in blood and dust, he is on edge. Another with sword in hand runs up, desperately shouting at him to hold on. But before he can speak, he rushes forward screaming, realizing that it could all end right now. An explosive blast follows, sending earth and rocks flying apart with terrible force. When the dust settles, the fighter lies in the crater, breathing heavily and clenching his bloody fist. The golem caves in with a resounding thud, and another knight is blown out of the battle. With screams of horror, the fighters realize their unit is all but wiped out. The man with the frown is silent, but the tension on his face speaks for itself. Another officer grits his teeth and says, "It's too suspicious for a golem to just show up like that." One of the mages confirms, "Such creatures do not appear on their own, they must be controlled by someone." One of the fighters shouts to Gerard that the damage is growing rapidly and it is time to retreat and regroup. There is a sharp reaction to his words. Another voice angrily demands an explanation, not believing what he has heard. The fighter is confused, not knowing how to answer, and his face reads tension and fear. Gerard shouts in rage that the offering to the Marquis must be delivered in 3 days. He orders the path to be cleared in 24 hours, or else he'll tell them that if you don't, you'll die on the spot. The evening sky shrouds the mage tower, and someone below is wondering if his gift has arrived. The mage jokingly asks if it's a gift for her lover, hinting with a smile. Calyx immediately replies with a denial, and she playfully lowers her head and admits that she wants something too. At this time, the other girl turns around with a bewildered look on her face upon hearing the phrase. Another girl is watching the scene suspiciously from around the corner, her eyes full of shadow and jealousy.